Hello and welcome to our second Startup Global webinar of 2023, Building Intellectual Property Skills. I'm Crystal Falea, Managing Director at Startup Canada, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's event. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm on today is located on the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory that you reside on today. Today's session is being recorded. The recording will be shared afterwards on our YouTube channel and available on our Facebook page. So if you have to jump out for whatever reason, you'll be able to catch up on any good stuff that you've missed afterwards. We invite each of our attendees in today's webinar to introduce themselves and connect with each other in the chat. Feel free to share your name, your organization, where you're joining from. Just make sure you're sending messages to everyone in the room, and otherwise Zoom will default to sending them only to the hosts and the panelists, which is great as well, but just so you can connect with each other. A bit about Startup Canada. So Startup Canada is a national nonprofit gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're here to connect entrepreneurs with the support, community, and tools they need to build a successful business in Canada. Since launching in 2012, Startup Canada has grown to support over 129,000 entrepreneurs annually. Very proud of that number, and an ever-growing grassroots community network from coast to coast to coast. Startup Global is one of our flagship programs that connects a pan-Canadian cohort of entrepreneurs wanting to build global businesses with a network of great partners dedicated to their success. This free program recognizes the importance of exporting to the Canadian economy and celebrates those making waves in global marketplaces. We also really try to empower early stage founders to take their ventures to the international stage. I'd like to take a moment to thank our co-presenting partners, Export Development Canada, EDC, the Trade Commissioner Service, TCS, who will have joining us today. We have Eric, UPS and Desjardins, as well as our amazing ecosystem support partners, Scotiabank, eBay, Google, North Forge, the Trade Facilitation Office of Canada, GS1, and of course, the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada. Today's conversation is going to be focused on how we can better understand intellectual property and how to protect your ideas and your inventions and innovations, especially as you look to take your product or service to the global market. Today's speakers have extensive knowledge in intellectual property and innovation, and they'll provide a comprehensive overview of the different types of intellectual property, as well as some practical tips for protecting your IP in the digital age. We have prepared some questions for our panelists. However, if you do have a question, please feel free to add it into the Q&A box in the bottom function on your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can live. However, we'll also try to follow up afterwards with any information that we can share to help address some of those questions. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce our speakers today. With us, we have Tony Orsi, partner at Bereskin and Parr, LLP. We have Eric Futin from the Trade Commissioner Service as a Trade Commissioner, and we have Bronwyn Bridges, CEO and co-founder of PragmaClin. Well, first of all, welcome speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today and dedicating your time to this. Maybe we can start off with some brief introductions. Maybe you can share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and the role that you play within your organizations. But maybe we'll start with our entrepreneur. Bronwyn, maybe we can kick things off and then we'll head over to Tony and then Eric.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today, and hopefully you take away something valuable from this webinar with us. My name is Bronwyn Bridges. I am the CEO and co-founder of PragmaClin Research. We are a digital health company based out of the East Coast of Canada in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we started back in 2020 when my co-founder was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and we wanted to help patients in remote areas be able to access healthcare equally. So we created a digital assessment for Parkinson's disease patients about 2 years ago, and now we're a team of 10 that is scaled out of what was a research project.
Super awesome, Bronwyn. Thank you so much. Let's go over to Tony.
Well, hi there, everyone. Just as Bronwyn had mentioned, thanks very much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for an hour. And hopefully, you'll find this educational and be able to get some good tips from each of us. I'm a partner and patent agent with Bereskin and Parr, which is an intellectual property law firm. Our headquarters is in Toronto, but we do work with clients and organizations from coast to coast. My background is in electrical and biomedical engineering, so I'll practice primarily in those areas, but we have others, that focus on other areas of patents, other technical fields, as well as other types of IP services as well. For myself personally, I am involved in several different startup organizations, and I find it very rewarding to be interacting with startups and helping them to learn about intellectual property and how they may be able to use that to build value for their business.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you join us, Tony. And let's go over to Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal, for the invitation and to be here today with you. So my name is Eric Futin, and I'm working as a trade commissioner for the Trade Commissioner Service, leading on IP. I've been with government for 27 years now, almost. And as I'm an economist by background, so I work in economics at ISET for a while. I work at CIPO also, Canadian Intellectual Property Office on data and on IP. So I know a lot about data on IP. And I work also on trade policy for e-commerce. So I just joined GAC 5 years ago now. And as I said, yeah, I'm working in helping the network, our trade commissioners around the world and in regional office with their IP needs to better support IP. So it's like a two-step procedure. I'm providing the tools for trade commissioners to better do their work. So thank you for inviting me today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we have a lot to dig into today. Intellectual property, IP is a very, very meaty topic and lots to uncover. So with that, maybe Tony, I'll direct the first question to you to get us going. But could you give us an overview at a high level of the three main types of intellectual property? I know we have patents, trademarks, copyrights, and if you could do a little bit to help provide a bit of color and context to each of those, that would be great.
Sure, Crystal. Yeah, thanks. Yes, you're absolutely right. Those are some of the main categories of the IP rights that we look to every day to help protect our clients' value, our creation, to create value. So with respect to trademarks, they're a type of IP right which are used to protect the brand. So basically you think about trademarks with respect to your branding and your marketing strategy and being able to use trademarks to identify the goods and services from one provider from those of others that are in the marketplace. They can come in a variety of different forms. So they could be word marks, for example, for the company name, as well as their products and service names, or they could even be logos, which could include images plus words. And there are other formats as well. With respect to copyright here, you're looking at protecting creative works that are in a material form. And really, this relates to the ability to control the production and reproduction of these material works. And this covers a lot of different things. So typically people might think of the more traditional types of things such as literary works or movies or songs, but they can also be used to protect certain parts of a website, for example, software programs as well. And also some packaging and marketing materials, to name a few, can also extend to cover a little bit with, overlap a bit with trademarks as well. And then patents come in two different forms. So there are industrial design patents, which are used to protect the appearance of an object, and it could be something which is physical, so furniture or clothing, for example, or it could be something which is virtual, so a graphical user interface or an icon. And then the other type of patent, which is more well-known, maybe referred to as a utility patent, and those are used to protect the structure and or function of an invention. And so when you're looking at these different types of IP rights, you're looking at how you can use them together to provide holistic protection for what you've created and to, of course, build value for the company. And it really comes down to trying to cover off what makes your company unique compared to the competitors and what gives you a competitive edge. The other thing to think about too is that typically these IP rights apply on a country by country basis. So you'll need to think about that with respect to your overall strategy in terms of where you're looking for protection.
That's great, and such an important matter, especially as, you know, if you're an entrepreneur looking to go global and take your product or service into different markets, being aware of, you know, the different filings that you might have to do in those different regions, and building that into your overall plan. I think when we look at, you know, building a bit of a business plan and you're trying to figure out the costs associated with getting your business off the ground and running, oftentimes it's like, okay, you think about, you know, where you're starting your business, but also trying to look ahead to some of those areas or locations of where you want to go, just so you've got that, you know, sort of in your sort of your plan sort of moving forward. Thank you so much, Tony.
Absolutely,
Super helpful.
yeah. Thank you.
Bronwyn, maybe from your perspective, you can share with us a bit about your business and your sort of foray in with IP and what your IP journey has looked like.
It has been a journey, but we are really working on the opposite side of Tony here, who does all the hard stuff for me, I guess. We create the stuff and hope that people like Tony are able to help us. We have looked at everything from patents to trademark and copyright, and everything from algorithm patents to design patents and what that looks like, and then the value. And I think I was touching on actually recently, the value proposition at a lot of the time for businesses is that they're looking for external investment, and investors want to make sure that what they're investing in is protectable. So you look at everything from how can this bring value to your company, and by protecting this IP, how does that bring more monetary value to your company in the end and in the long run, especially if you want to sell out or you want to be purchased by somebody else, that IP belongs to the company and is a part of the sell. The other portion is that I have to be kind of cautious on who you work with and what contractors you bring in and the employees. So in the other side of IP, we see things like non-disclosure agreements that we sign with absolutely everybody we talk to, especially that work with us. And I think that's something you learn very on, is you sign NDAs every single day with people, and you just get so used to it. And they, you know, made jokes when I started, like, make sure you start signing those. But it's funny that you look back and you see situations that happen where there was an NDA signed and what that looks like and how that can transpire, especially in protecting your IP. So making sure that you're keeping track of who has access to what and what you've signed off on can really help, especially in when you want to go into that patenting world. So we have a lot of programs as well that have been super helpful, which I think we'll touch on a little bit as well. But there is so many valuable resources within Canada that really help to be able to keep the IP within Canada and be able to expand globally from that. And I don't know if you want me to touch on it now about some of those programs that are available, but I'm sure Eric has some value and insight into those too. But it has allowed us to work with organizations like Tony's, where we can, you know, work with really valuable lawyers that we typically wouldn't be able to work with as a startup, but to make sure that we have our IP protected from day one and can scale from that. I think that's really important to make sure that you have a strategy in place from day one and how you're going to protect everything you've worked on.
That's great. And that's exactly where I was going to throw in a bit of a follow-up question there, Bronwyn, is if you take yourself back to your early days and when you were building the business, you know, what were some of those initial questions that you may have had around, like, how do I even figure this out versus who do I need to actually work with and when to start working with an expert advisor? Maybe you can kind of share a little bit about some of that, like, early stage in the process.
Yeah. I think that it is really important that you find the right people and the right supporters from day one. So in the ecosystem, we typically base everything off of recommendations. So if people in our network have said that they've had good success or good work with an ex-advisor or company, et cetera, we typically take those recommendations strongly and use them and avail of them as well. So in the beginning, when we said, you know, we could really look into what our IP looks like, now that we're starting to scale and it's less of a project and more of a company, talk to the local ecosystem partners here that we had met at some events. And one of the recommendations was, have you heard of Bereskin and Parr? They're really good. And, you know, they have a local person that used to live here. And so then we got connected that way and then ended up working through that organization based off of recommendations. And it's worked out really well for us. So thank you, Bereskin. But I think really just playing it off of examples of other companies who have been through the process, because you can hear really great stories And you can also hear horror stories of people who have not protected it properly. So use the good advice and the bad advice, and really sort through what you need to be prepared for. And one thing is, we used a contractor in the early days. So also being cautious that, you know, you're doing this work outside of your company, and you really have to trust that what you're doing outside of your organization is properly being handled. And we realized really quickly, you know, we have to start signing off on paperwork that when this comes back to us, it belongs to us and things like that. So we brought in some pro bono, some free advice that incubators could offer on how we should set ourselves up. And then when the funding was available and we were able to start working with partners like this, then we were able to bring in IP lawyers so that we could be set up for success moving forward. So I think starting as early as possible, you can get pro bono services and advice given to you for free from day one from people within the ecosystem. And I think you should really take all of that advice that you can in the early days to set yourself up for success.
That's awesome. Very practical too, from, you know, how to sort of mentally prepare yourself for jumping into something that might feel potentially overwhelming because there's so much sort of behind it and so much into it. But when you're thinking about protecting your brand, your product or your service, like it's essential and sort of paramount to any company's success. So thanks for sharing that with us, Bronwyn. And now, Eric, over to you. Could you share a bit, you know, TCS is a huge ecosystem player when we talk about support for entrepreneurs, especially going and assessing international markets. Maybe you can share a little bit more about the role that TCS plays and what TCS does to help in the IP space.
Thank you. Of course. That's an interesting question. And there's a number we should remember is that Canada is accounting only for 0.5% of global population. That means there's 99.5% potential customers around the world. So that's why the TCS has really an importance. And talking about the TCS, I mean, we've been around for more than 125 years, where we have 1,000 trade commissioners around the world in regional offices. We serve 10,000 clients a year in 160 locations, and around the world at 6 regional offices. So we're everywhere. We're here to help. And our service is free of charge. And we're serving companies and organizations that have meaningful economic ties to Canada, and they have a good potential to add value to Canadian economy. And most importantly, they are export ready. They have to be ready to export. And for us, for TCS, I mean, those companies are our clients. We consider them clients. So we're dedicated to serve them, and we provide 4 key services. We provide key market insights and practical business advice. We help open doors to new business opportunities globally. We identify qualified business contacts. We resolve complex business problems as well in foreign markets. So usually when a company is ready and thinks they would fit as a TCS clients, our offices across Canada are the best way to first connect with the TCS to prepare to plan. And regarding IP and how do we fit in the IP ecosystem, the TCS is more or less at the last tiers of the continuum of the innovation continuum. We're there when they are ready to move their IP into international markets. And so trade commissioners cannot provide legal advice to companies, but we're here to help finding the right contacts, like making connection to CIPO, the Intellectual Property Office, or to EPIC, to lawyers in EPIC. And we're there to help and to find solutions if you have a problem. But also we're helping in terms of funding. I mean, we're part of the, I would say, the Canada IP funding in total. So we're there along with IRAP IP Assist and ISET Elevate IP. So we have the Can Export program that has just been enhanced with budget 2022. We received $35 million over 5 years to help companies to move with their IP and to protect their IP when they go abroad. And so usually that program is for SMEs that are like not scaled up, but like really like they're ready to go. And usually present SMEs that are really like they need they have to have a revenue between $100,000 to $1 million. That's the types of SMEs that we're serving in terms of CanExport programs. So we have two programs: the CanExport SMEs and innovation. So the SMEs is really to prepare, establish a presence in international markets, helping them going there, and innovation is really to assist in getting SMEs in academic institutions to establish and formalize new collaboration, research and development partnerships in foreign partners. So, I mean, PCS is here to help, and we're part of the ecosystem with EDC, BDC, EPIC, and all those entities that are there to help companies to flourish and to protect their IP when they go abroad. So basically so just contact me or the TCS if you need like help or just join. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Eric. And my colleague Isabel just dropped a link to CanExport in the chat for those that are interested.
Right.
But it's also really great to, help to explain at what point businesses can start to apply for some of these funding opportunities and such. So thank you for sort of putting some of that context around that as well. But also just on the advisory side, I think there's so much expertise within the Trade Commissioner Service that, is super valuable and potentially undertapped by a lot of folks. So there are lots of trade commissioners and lots of offices across the country and the world. So there's someone likely close by to where most folks are. So we'll share some contact details afterwards as well. Yeah, great. So I'm going to, sort of loop this in and open this up to any of our guests here, but wanting to start with a bit of the basics. I know we talked about it a little bit right at the beginning, but how and why should startups protect their intellectual property at all costs? I know, Tony, you touched on it a little bit, and Bronwyn, you did just based off of your practical experiences, but I want to potentially look at digging in a little bit further into what the challenges businesses are likely to face if they don't protect their IP. Who would like to take that one?
I guess maybe I can start off.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Yeah, basically, as you mentioned, it's very important to consider intellectual property right from the start. Bronwyn has mentioned that as well. If not, from the perspective of, looking to secure your own IP rights, looking at it from a defensive perspective as well, so that you're not infringing on the rights of others and getting yourself into trouble down the road. And so it's all about, learning the basics of intellectual property. And as Eric had mentioned, there's a lot of organizations in the ecosystem here. You can definitely go to CIPO's website, and they'll have manuals for the different types of IP rights that you could read to educate yourself on in terms of how they work. But basically, you're looking at it from the perspective of best practices in your day-to-day business, as well as planning for the future, as you had mentioned, Crystal, as well. So it's all about looking at what your business plan is, and then looking at creating an IP strategy that'll help you execute on your business plan and help you to achieve certain goals. So sometimes we'll be speaking with individuals who may be thinking that maybe you only pursue a patent because you're looking at suing someone and you don't have the resources to be able to do that, or vice versa, but there's really other reasons as well. And so I think the thing then is, again, looking at this from a business perspective and looking at the cost benefit analysis that you can do for pursuing different types of rights and what sort of fits. So it's also quite tailored to the companies themselves and based on what they're doing. And so some of these IP rights may be more important than others that they should be looking at. And certainly as a company starts to engage with others, as Bronwyn had mentioned, it's very important to conduct yourselves carefully and be careful about what you share and making sure that you have proper agreements in place. So protecting yourself with NDAs if you have to share sensitive information, and if you're getting any other organization or individual that's outside of the company, as well as internal employees too, making sure that there's contracts in place so that anything that they work on would be owned by the company and the IP rights as well. So that's best practices that we advise on too. And I think through building on their IP strategy, making good choices in terms of even say branding from the beginning, so that they don't have to rebrand later if they infringe on the rights of others. Those could be things that are done. And as you're building up these assets over time, they could be used for different purposes. So as Bronwyn had mentioned, depending on the types of products and services that you provide, we usually find that with companies that are more tech focused, when they're looking to get investors on board, investors are looking to make sure that, the IP strategy is in place, that there is some sort of protection in place as well from a patent perspective, if possible, to help them to mitigate their risks. And also, considering other types of activities, perhaps such as freedom to operate, for example. And then also, in terms of the company, maybe engaging with other organizations who could be partners, these IP assets might assist and facilitate that process as well. So those are just a few of the things to think about.
Super important, Tony, like so important what you sort of just walked through and took us through in that. And just to unpack a little bit, I'd love to know, and I'm sure it will vary based off of the business or the industry or, where folks are looking to go, even on the international trade front. But what would you say would be the core components that an entrepreneur should consider as part of building their IP strategy? Are there like 2 or 3 key pillars that they should like for sure include or ensure that they are mindful of as they are building their business plans?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in terms of, the main components to look at, one of them would definitely be education. So, getting to understand the different types of IP rights and how they're used and how they can be applied. And that could be done through various ways. So, engaging with different organizations, including incubators and regional innovation centers, for example, or, reaching out to perhaps people at CIPO or, professionals like ourselves or IPIC, for example, as well. That can assist with that process. And then part of that too is also making sure that everyone in the company is on board as well, so that they understand how IP works, because everyone has to work as a unit in terms of how, in terms of recognizing IP assets that could be pursued, as well as, making sure that you're not engaging in any activity which could lead to trouble down the road. I think another pillar would be, again, to look internally and try to figure out, what IP assets the company currently has and where they're going, and try to capture those IP assets. And then the other would be from a risk mitigation perspective. So again, looking to see what's going on in the marketplace, what rights others may have, and how the company conducts itself to, make sure that they try to minimize any sort of risks down the road.
That's great. Very helpful. Super great detail to layer in, to keep in mind as you're sort of like looking ahead, looking at whether it's your product roadmaps or whatever you might be building out for the future. One other question that I feel like, comes up often is like, is there a time limitation associated with trademarks or patents or renewals or, any of those pieces? Curious about, how you can plan ahead with, understanding sort of the appropriate amount of time that you need to either bucket for the application process for some of these, but then also if there are oftentimes renewals involved and or additional applications that need to go into different markets from an international standpoint. I don't know if you've got any tips on that front, Tony.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question as well. Yeah, and something that's very important to keep front of mind. And again, one of the reasons why we say it's important to think about intellectual property right from the beginning, because some of these rights, do have timelines tied to them, and some, for some of them as well, it depends on when you're filing with the IP office, and maybe perhaps beating out others who might be trying to protect something similar or the same thing. So timelines are very important. Also, looking at commercialization timelines and product roadmap. For patents, for example, many patent offices have the requirement that the invention be kept secret until you file your first application. So you've got to be very careful in terms of how you engage with the public and others, and not provide too much of an enabling disclosure, which may affect your ability to file in certain countries. So that's an important thing. And then also, depending on which IP right you pursue, it could start a whole process going, in which case there's, deadlines that need to be met. So again, using patents as an example, once you file your first application in your first country, which would be the country that has the biggest market for you, given your product roadmap plan. You then would have a year after that to figure out which other countries you'd want to file in while being able to link it to that first filing. And it's important from an examination standpoint, but it speaks to one of your points where you need to start thinking about your international strategy early on. And there could be mechanisms that you could use as well to delay when that decision has to be made. But basically understanding those timelines is very important.
That's super, super effective. And I feel like also comes back and we keep coming back to the need for NDAs and having those sort of like from almost day one, oftentimes, and ensuring whether it's your internal team, your external partners that you might be working with, ensuring that, you've got things on lockdown just from a general protection standpoint. Bronwyn, maybe I'll go over to you. Do you have any additional tips or tricks from a best practice standpoint, things maybe where you may have stumbled and maybe learned afterwards, perhaps?
Like I said, start early. I was laughing as Tony's answering this question because on a call prior, we learned of timelines for filing trademarks across the world, and just knowing those timelines and ways to protect your IP, like the earlier you start, the better. And I think it stems into like also mentioned, like what you want to put out in the public knowledge. And there's this fine line between wanting to promote what you're doing and gain publicity, we'll say, across the world, but without giving away anything, because there is those big players that might be in the same space, and they have more money, they have more power, they have more employees, and they could take over what you're doing as a startup. So it's making sure that you've kind of like crossed your T's and dotted your I's and made sure that you have everything lined up perfectly, or at least semi-perfectly, and from day one. And that's whether that's signing those NDAs and the non-disclosure, non-compete agreements, or making sure that you have contracts in place when you work with contractors, or how you work within the office versus without. And especially now, the way that the world is with remote employees and working from home on their own computers, and how to protect that IP process. So making sure that you have agreements in place before you start anything, and knowing those timelines are long, and you can say they're long, but reality is they're very long, and that's just the way it is. You have to be prepared for those timelines no matter what field you're in.
And I can imagine Matt, like helping to manage expectations, both internally within, your teams, and helping, to build that morale and that excitement about what it is that you are, creating and building together, but then also potentially externally with, any stakeholders that you have involved in the business who are also eager for you to be successful. So lots of sort of expectation management, I think, coming along with that, which is great. Eric, maybe I'll tap into you. Do you have any sort of best practices from an international maybe lens, or from an exporting lens that you can layer on top?
Yes, and thanks, Tony, and to try to explain everything about IP. I have nothing to say more than it was so well done. You picked up all my lines. No, just kidding. But I mean, it's just something very crucial for startups. And I mean, yeah, the IP strategy should be thought like there's no afterthoughts. It should be thought like at the first thing. And one of the challenges sometimes is that you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know you need an IP strategy. You don't know about your IP portfolio. Sometimes you concentrate on your invention, you're developing your R&D, but I will think that maybe IP later on. No, that's something that should be thought at the first place. And you're talking also about NDAs. I know that like IP are territorial, but NDA as well. So sometimes if you have a partner, you sign an NDA and you have a trade secret, and one of the partner goes abroad and they patent your invention. So there's always a danger. I'm not an IP practitioner, so maybe I don't know if I can advance on that territory, but that's what I understood. So yeah, I mean, making sure one of the best practice is really to hire an IP professional to guide you in your IP strategy, like to match your IP strategy with your business strategy, with your export strategy. I mean, the IP strategy should be thought like at the first time, like at the beginning, like where you want to go, where do you want to protect. It's like playing chess, you have to think like a move in advance, like make sure you understand where you want to go. because patents, as I said, I mean, they're territorial. So, I mean, you have to think about the countries you want to go. So that's one of the best practice where I keep saying to clients, I mean, thinking, and also for clients, I mean, it's basically two questions they have to think about. And I think like Tony addressed that. Like the first one is, how can I defend my IP rights in case of infringements in foreign markets? And the second one would be, how can I be certain that I'm not infringing any other IP rights? So it's important to do the like a freedom to operate study in foreign countries to see where's your white space. You have the freedom to go there without infringing. So you can target a country, but I mean, it's not, it's a crowded space. So you can maybe target another one. So that's something you should talk to an IP professional. And again, the TCS can help finding one for you. So yeah, that's my tips. I would say, like, be prepared.
I love that. And I love the chess analogy. I'm a big chess fan myself. So I think it's so important to try to be thinking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead oftentimes, right? Just like you strategize when you're playing chess. The strategy part, just as you're building your business strategy, there are all these individual micro strategies that you also need to be mindful of, IP being a huge sort of component in and of itself there. We did get one.
Sorry, and remember also that IP is a fragile asset. I mean, secrecy is important. It's all about the secrecy. So before choosing your right IP right or keeping a trade secret, I mean, you have to keep the invention to yourself. Like if you go to a trade show, for instance, in a foreign country, make sure you're protected before bragging about your invention, because someone in the room can take your inventions. It's like when I watch like Dragon's Den, for instance, they always ask entrepreneurs, like, have you registered your trademark? Do you have a patent on that? Like, oh, no, also protect it before going live on TV, you know? So it's the same thing internationally. And you should think that it's fragile. And when it's like toothpaste, when it's go out, you cannot bring it back, you know? So.
I love it. No, very, very, very essential too. And such a great example of, you know, when to start broadcasting, especially on, you know, larger platforms. And we'll get into the digital space in a little bit, but we did just get a question in the chat about, can you provide steps as to how and where to apply for IP protection? Do we need a lawyer right off of the bat, or can we file the documents ourselves? Are there, you know, preliminary templates, you know, out there? Should we trust them? Or are we better off really, you know, looking at investing, working with a lawyer immediately, even before our business is, you know, fully developed? I'm kind of coloring in that question a little bit just to expand for our audience, but I'm not sure who on our crew here might be best at responding to that.
I was going to say, I can jump on to start and then maybe throw it to Tony. But yeah, how and where to apply. I think that I would like to say I could do it myself, but I cannot. I know that, and I'm very well aware of that. So I've brought in lawyers kind of from the early days, but like I said, there's incubators and programs who offer, you know, an hour or 2 hours of free services typically to start working with a lawyer to figure out at least what your plan should be. And then from there, you can typically find funding like through NRCI RAP. There's an IP assist program, and you can get funding to support working with these organizations and these lawyers. But when it comes to NDAs, that's a simple template, which you can find online. There's lots of NDAs around. Definitely make sure you have a look through and it suits the needs of your organization as well. But also another thing I recommend is we had an NDA in day one, and it's not the same NDA we use anymore. And it's really just because we've talked to people in the network and thought, you know, you'll send off an NDA and somebody will say, you know, I'm not comfortable to sign this because it doesn't suit exactly maybe what it is, if it's a non-compete and you're working with a contractor or how that looks. And so people will provide you feedback about what it is that they're not comfortable with, and maybe you can modify it for that individual, or you can have a standard template for the organization. So we have a couple we work with depending on who we're working with. And we've found these through templates that we've modified or through our network of other companies who are in the same space, and asked organizations like, what's the typical one you use? And people are very comfortable to share templates of their NDAs. I mean, they're pretty standard across the board. So if you find somebody who's in your space, it's likely that they would provide you a template. But how to apply for it, I would always recommend you pull the safe route and get a lawyer from day one, because you may spin your wheels trying to do it yourself, and then it doesn't actually pan out and you have to go back to a lawyer. So you should have started with a lawyer kind of from the beginning. And that's not just a promo to get a lawyer. It's like, make sure you're doing everything the proper way from day one, because there's no point to try and backpedal and have to fix a mess when you could have just started from a clean slate. And there's also a pros and cons of a patent versus a trade secret, which maybe Tony can touch on that question as well. But I think there's definitely pros and cons depending on what field you're in, for sure. If you're in a software field, if you're in a hardware field, if you're in med tech, etc. And so, yeah, I'll leave that to Tony to touch on, but I think there's definitely pros and cons of each of them. And if you're looking for external investment or you're not, and how to go from that.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. That was yeah, very good. I agree with a lot of the things that you said there. Again, yeah, not to be promoting working with lawyers, but when it comes to pursuing IP rights and you don't do things properly, it can often be fatal and hard to correct it afterwards. And you may not get a second chance to be able to file again, for example, especially on the patent side of things, depending on activities and whatnot. So it's very important to make sure that you're doing things properly. And also, it comes down to everything, I guess, is can be unique, especially when you're looking at inventions, which by definition have to be unique, and the things that you're protecting for them are unique. So it pays to be working with someone who has experience, because they could help you think about things from a different perspective. For example, when we're working with some inventors, they may come to us with their preferred way of implementing the invention and sort of have the blinders on. And we're trying to get them to expand their view and think about alternatives, maybe alternative uses as well, try to think about how things might change in the future, and, try to capture these things in the patent application and get some broader protection as well. Because once you file it, you wouldn't be able to add anything new to it afterwards. With respect to NDAs and other types of agreements, there are templates that you could use as starting points, and I think, as Bronwyn had mentioned, even if you speak with your colleagues, they may be able to provide you with templates. From our perspective, we think that you should always be tailoring the agreement to the situation at hand, especially because you could be dealing with different individuals who could be doing different things. Just as Bronwyn had mentioned, you may have a few NDA templates that you could use as a starting point and then have to make modifications. Or if you're dealing with someone else who's reputable and they have an NDA that they want to use as a starting point, that might be a way to make things go a little bit quicker if you sort of work with that as well. But yeah, it's good to make sure that those get vetted too, to make sure that you're totally covered. And yeah, just to touch on something that Eric had mentioned before as well, the NDAs at the end of the day are as good as the other side who's signing them. And so it always comes back down to good business practices and dealing with others who are reputable, because they could potentially sign the NDA and then end up doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And while you do have contractual means to go after them, it could be very fatal to what you're trying to do. So in terms of IP, it's a piece of the puzzle, and you've got to consider the other aspects of the business too, as you're working on the startup and getting it going and scaling up. Okay, and then yeah, sorry, I was just going to jump on the question here, actually. If you don't mind, yeah, pros and cons of patent versus trade secret. So yeah, trade secrets, we haven't really spoken much about them, but they're definitely another type of IP right, and important in their own right. And when it comes to trade secrets, it's not just innovations or know-how that could be valuable to protect as a trade secret, but basically anything which provides you with business value, should be maintained in confidence. More and more these days, trade secrets can also be applied to data, for example. So, data is becoming huge in certain areas where, certain companies have a large amount of data, and they can mine it and analyze it to determine things which could be of commercial value to others. And so, yeah, trade secrets may be a mechanism through which, they're able to retain value for that in dealing with others, as well as they may be licensing rights. But yeah, usually if you're looking at it from an innovation perspective, trade secrets, yeah, could be looked at if it's extremely difficult to come up with that innovation, like for others to do that, whereby, going through trade secret route extends the amount of protection. So if you were to file for a patent, you'd have a 20-year term of protection. But with a trade secret, as long as you're able to keep that innovation a secret, others aren't able to figure it out, you can indefinitely keep your advantage going on longer than that. And the best example of that would be the Coca-Cola formula, for example. And on the patent side, again, you could be looking at it from the perspective of what sort of business value that it provides you in terms of using it as an asset, and also perhaps looking at the scope of protection that's available too, and whether it makes sense to pursue something through a patent. The other thing with a trade secret as well is that there's risks. So if someone independently develops that trade secret on their own, you can't do anything to stop them. They may even go off and patent it, and again, you can't stop them. And then also there's always the risk of leaks. So people that are privy to that trade secret information, using it for their own purposes or leaking it to others.
If I may, I can concur what Tony is saying, that trade secrets, you can think can save money and it's going to be fast and you sign NDAs and stuff like that. But on the long run, it can be more costly because you'll have to engage lawyers to defend then your trade secrets. So it's the chicken and the egg. So, and also, but it's also depending on the life cycle of your product. If it's like something that really will be obsolete in 1 year or 2 years, maybe it's not worth it to spend 3 years. I don't know, I'm just throwing that idea, but something also that I wanted to mention about IP is that it's very important that companies take stock of their IP portfolio. We're always talk about trade secrets and patent, and sometimes company can say, oh, I don't have IP because I don't have a patent. You said, yeah, okay, but you have a name. You have a trademark. You should protect it as well, especially if you go abroad. And I know that's the next topic on the digital world, but if you go abroad on e-commerce, protecting your trademark is key. And industrial design as well. A chair is a chair. How you differentiate your product is not on the patent of the chair. It's going to be on the design. So those are the types of IP that sometimes we don't think it's important because we're always focusing on patents, but it's quite important to think about the complete picture of it and make also a right decision. Doing nothing also and protecting your IP is also a decision, but at least you're making your decision. So that's, again, it should be important to talk to a professional that can guide you on that. And just to mention that on the TCS website, we have, we're talking about resources. If you go on the TCS website, we have a dedicated page on our website with the steps on the IP journey, from day one to exporting. What are the steps you should consider, and also the resources, if you go to PCT or everything, I don't want to be in details, but all the details about IP that can be useful for an innovator to go then with an IP professional. So they will talk with an enlightened. They know what they're going to talk about. They won't go oh, I don't know what it is. So you have that. So yeah, thanks.
No, that's great. All very helpful. And I love the sort of being able to layer on top of each other's sort of comments. And I think we've been able to uncover different tips and insights that probably we wouldn't have had a chance to dig into otherwise. I am going to move into the digital front here. Maybe Bronwyn, I'll direct this one to you just from an entrepreneur perspective, but what is something that stands out for you in terms of the internet and the world of social media and how everyone is now connected more than ever, arguably, and how has it impacted intellectual property in the startup space from your viewpoint?
Oh, it's a loaded question for sure. Anybody who's familiar with what we do and our LinkedIn, you would know that I travel a lot for pitch competitions, and that is really how we've been able to bootstrap and leverage our entire company. From that, though, is that I'm pitching my idea across the world and I'm telling people what we're doing. And so it's a matter of, being cautious that when we share all these things on social media and where we're going to be and what we're talking about and videos that we have, it's that nothing that we're giving away is what our intellectual property is. And so it's really figuring out kind of what we use in our terms and our calls is, the golden nugget of what our company is based on for our IP strategy, and making sure that none of that is ever released in these posts or in the conversations we have or in the pitch competitions. You'll know that in the pitch competitions, though, one of the main questions we get is, what's your IP strategy? Because everybody always wants to know, like, how are you protecting this? In which we say everything we've talked about on this call and the ways that you can protect it, and we will protect it, and we have protected it. So I think that social media can be such a great example of how you can accelerate and like shoot forward your business really quickly with a lot of success, especially through networking. Creating, a massive LinkedIn network and connections and community is how we found most of our employees, for example, and it's how we found partner organizations and funders and investors. But in saying that, you do have to, you have to be cautious, because everything that's on the internet, I say good luck getting it off the internet ever. It will never be scrubbed from the internet. So, one wrong post could be super detrimental, but one great post could be an accelerator for your business. So it's a matter of, looking at posts before they go out and proofing them, and make sure that there's nothing that's going out there that can't be taken down, because that can be problematic. So I think that if you're using it, you can use it to your advantage, and it can be fantastic, especially in the world we're living in, where things like ChatGPT are becoming like the biggest thing known to the world. But there's so many ways that you can use social media to accelerate. It's just being cautious of how you're protecting your IP when you're doing that is incredibly important.
I think that's an essential tip, especially if you're like just launching a business for the first time, or launching even new products in your portfolio. Like, at what point do you start teasing out you've got something new coming down the pipe? How much do you share? How far in advance? Having all of that into consideration, looking at your product roadmap, your IP strategy, but then also your Marcom sort of promotional strategy as part of that. They all sort of do need to work together. And so going back to, I think, an earlier comment where we were talking about the internal teams, like all of your employees should also be on the same page as it relates to that IP strategy, so that they understand some of those repercussions, some of those potential risks if we start sharing, information about a new product before we've actually had paperwork go through that might need to go through. And that's, one question that I have, and Tony, I'm wondering if you've got any practical tips. Are there any steps, and I'm going to look more from the trademark and copyright standpoint, but are there any like simple tools that entrepreneurs can use when they're trying to figure out product names, or they're exploring different sort of brand names before going down a full path or a full formal path of application? Any tips that you have on that sort of like idea generation, name generation stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I think it's something that startups and other companies think about quite a bit. I'm not familiar with a tool that helps you come up with these names, but again, it would sort of be taking the steps that we've mentioned before, which is doing some homework. So you could do some searching, just general Google searching, but you can also definitely go to the various patent office or trademark office websites, and they've got databases there that are free to search. So if there are names that you're thinking of, you could be searching through the trademarks database, for example, at SIPO, to see, what's been registered, for example. And and then again, knowing a little bit about the basics of trademarks, where, certain things, wouldn't be possible as a mark. And also, keeping in mind that, your mark can't be confusingly similar to others as well. So again, there's probably a bit of experience that's needed in terms of trying to make that call. But, certainly you can go through and do some of that homework. The other thing too is that with respect to trademarks, the more unique the name is, the better. So, and the more descriptive it is of the underlying service, which is something that, the marketing people would love, is actually more challenging to actually get a trademark registration for. So if you can think of, totally made up words, and logos that are, again, just being very creative with that, being careful not to maybe take pieces of existing trademarks and try to combine them. You don't want to do that, but certainly the more creative you can be, I think the better when it comes to trademark registration. And then from a copyright perspective, again, looking at any sort of content that you've created and making sure that you identify that, and you could use the copyright symbol and the name of the owner, in the year of creation, all rights reserved if you haven't licensed any rights to it. If you have someone else who's creating this for you, again, getting an assignment document put in place so the ownership rights reside with the company. And then also looking at moral rights, which is something which is more unique to copyrights, which something to sort of try to address as well when you're engaging others in doing this work for you.
I feel like we probably could have done a whole session on like patents and a whole other session specifically on copyright and trademarks. There's so much to dig into, but I think what we've been able to share hopefully has been helpful even at a higher level, just to, all the things that you need to keep in mind when you're building your brand. And I think that's what it comes down to, is as you're building your brand name and then your subsequent product or service names or offerings, just making sure you have that with you from day one under consideration. And I think starting with quick Google searches and or looking at some of the preliminary sort of trademark search features that are available online, I think are also an easy first step if you're like trying to get your feet wet and figuring it all out, because there's so much to get through. I'm going to jump right into resources. I want to be mindful of time, but I'll open it up to see if there are any other, I know we've talked a lot about, we've got some really great resources from TCS. Maybe there's more. I know we've talked about NRC IRAP. We've talked about Can Export. We've talked about a few other different resources, but maybe we can do one final round of what would be one essential resource that entrepreneurs should consider as they're sort of navigating through building their IP strategy. Maybe Eric, I'll start with you first.
Okay, just one resource. That's tough. On funding, I would say like using the Can Export program. That's the best resource to get it financing. But also, contact the Trade Commissioner Service, and they're there to help to find the right IP professional as well to build your IP strategy. And also to be careful that when you try to find an IP specialist, it's important to be aware of the low cost, I would say, IP services, especially in foreign countries. It's important to find a real established IP professional that can help you in protecting your IP abroad. That's my 2 cents, but it's and also I just want to mention about another program that we have is the CTA program that maybe can be helpful because we're helping companies in clean tech, digital industries, ICT, life sciences, and digital health. And that's something that just invite you to go to our website and look at the Canadian Technology Accelerator Program. So that's another thing to take into consideration. Thanks.
Wonderful. Great recommendation. Thanks, Eric. Bronwyn, how about you?
Our resource I would say that I would recommend is to work with the NRC IRAP if you're in any portion of development and wanting to figure out your IP strategy. They offer an IP CISC program through the NRC. That is how we've been able to work with organizations to develop our IP plan and our patent strategy. So I think that working with them from an early day, once you're kind of in their network and they have a lot of really great resources. I can, freely promote both of the people on the call here because I work with both the Trade Commissioner and Bereskin Parr. So that's great. But I would also recommend, like Eric mentioned, the Trade Commissioner is a fabulous resource. I've been able to go around the world and meet partners and talk IP and gain contracts all through the CTA program, the trade missions, and Can Export funding. So thank you, Trade Commissioner. And thanks, Tony, for all your hard work on our IP.
And I guess we didn't tee that up at the top of this call, is that there is a nice thread between all of our guests that we have with us today, and just wanting to showcase the various perspectives, because it does take an ecosystem. It does take more than one person in order to help you become successful in building your business. So thank you. Tony, I'll throw it over to you. If you've got one quick resource you could share or last tip that maybe we haven't talked about.
Sure. And yeah, in terms of resources, I would encourage everyone on the call to, look into, other government programs as well. So, definitely at the federal and provincial levels, I think intellectual property is being looked at more and more. And there's programs that are coming online. So in Ontario, there's IP Ontario, for example. In Quebec, I think there's the Patent Box program that's available. And also there's Elevate IP as well, which is more of a national program that's being rolled out regionally, by different sort of associations of various organizations. So, depending on where you are, I, recommend that you take a look at that and try to reach out and learn more about those programs.
Wonderful. That's so great. Well, we are totally...
If I may add something, there's a saying that it needs a village to raise a kid. So it needs also an IP village to raise a startup or a company. So there's a lot of resources of EDC, BDC, IPON to help nurture those startups. Thanks.
Very true. Very true. Well, we are at time. I want to first thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank our wonderful, wonderful guests with us today. Thank you so much for your time. We do have a quick feedback poll for our attendees that Isabel will just launch. We will try to add in as many of those resources into the chat, if not into our follow-up emails that you'll receive from Startup Canada. But thank you, Tony, Eric, Bronwyn. Really appreciate you donating your time and energy and expertise to our audience today. Hopefully this was very helpful and insightful for many of our entrepreneurs. Thanks again to our co-presenting partners, Export Development Canada, the Trade Commissioner Service, UPS and Desjardins, as well as our ecosystem support partners, Scotiabank, eBay, North Forge, Google, Trade Facilitation Office of Canada, GS1, and the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada, or IPIC, if you will. In case you haven't heard, our 2023 Startup Global Pitch Competition has just launched this week, actually yesterday. This year, we are offering 2 ways to participate. Bronwyn actually was one of our pitch winners last year, came to Ottawa, pitched live on stage, won some money. It was great having you. But we'll have an opportunity to pitch both virtually as well as along our 5 upcoming cross-Canada tour stops. So there is an in-person option this year. In person, there's an opportunity to win $3,000 right on the spot, but then you can also still put your name into the hat for our larger pot of $70,000, which will be later this fall. So information is on our website. Isabel's going to drop it in the chat, but we look forward to seeing some really awesome pitchers this year who are ready to go global. So again, thank you so much, and really appreciate our speakers, your time and your energy. Again, on behalf of Startup Canada, thank you very much. And hopefully everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.